Hi guys, I just put a post up on both Facebook and Instagram just in the last hour or so. You can have a look at it because it'll be the post before this. And it's just a simple post-it note saying it's okay to rehome your dog. Now, as a standalone statement, does that need further examination? Yeah, absolutely it does. What's interesting about all stuff with dogs and with life is black and white thinking gets us into a lot of problems. It causes us to become entrenched in our positions and then not give leeway to people who circumstances we might not have considered. So if we think it's never okay to rehome your dog, um, and that's your position, it's not okay to rehome your dog. It means that we then have a potential not to have empathy and understanding for people who do need to rehome their dogs. So I'm going to give you some examples of that in a second. The other thing is a number of things can exist at the same time and all be true. Okay, um, yeah, so they can all exist at the same time and they be true. And we've got the we shouldn't versus what do we find. What do we do if we find ourselves in that position? So one of the comments that people were saying is that people should do the research before they get a dog, and some people shouldn't have a dog. So those are two should statements, which I probably agree with most. In fact, I do agree with some people shouldn't have a dog, and everybody should do the research before they get a dog. So those are two statements I absolutely agree with. However, that's should, okay. Um, and when I also hear should statements, I also say by whose metric, by whose opinion is should, okay? So I have expertise in dog, living with people with their dogs. I see the problems that people have when they get the dog that's wrong for their lifestyle. So that's an informed opinion that I have. However, if somebody is in a position where they haven't done their research and somebody who shouldn't have a dog gets a dog, what do we then do about that? So, very briefly on this, a few years ago, I did some work in a research lab with the animals. Now, I don't think we should be using animals for animal testing. Okay, that's a position that I have. That's my opinion on it. But I was asked to go in and see if I could improve some of the standards and some of the training practices to improve the conditions and the life of the animals who are already there. Okay, so do we agree? So you could agree that we shouldn't have them. Yep. Okay, but we do have them. So should is a fiction, okay, or an opinion. The fact that we do have animals in research facilities is the reality of it. Okay, so the reality that we have sometimes is that some people who shouldn't have dogs do have dogs. All right. Uh, Example from my own background. So my marriage broke down when my kids were young, so 20 years ago nearly, and I had two mastiffs at the time, and I went from being in a home with two adults who, because of those conditions, the dogs were rarely in the house for more than a few hours at a time, maybe 2 or 3 hours at a time, and I went from that within the space of effectively minutes to having to find a new place for myself and have two dogs that then required care um, while I was at work. And I was working, I was a police officer at the time, so I was working, I was away for 10 hours a time from the house. And I didn't have the money for a dog walker. Okay, so my reality changed because life freaking changes, man. All right, we just saw it. We saw people before the pandemic. They started their business thinking that everything was going to be cool, and then we got, you know, T-boned by this massive event, and that's what happened to me. This huge life event happened, and I was fortunate enough that I had enough support from friends and family that I could keep my dogs, and I did. All right, and then I did my best to look after them on my days off and on my time off. All right, but circumstances change. So that was through, well, could we argue that it's through some fault of my own? Yeah, I made the decision. We made the decision that our marriage wasn't, that our domestic circumstances changed, and on and on. Okay, but it did. Now, I had a client a few years ago, and in order to have some sort of discretion, I don't want to give too much details, but they had a giant breed dog. Okay, now when I started working with this couple, you start understanding when you do this long enough, and you're listening to what people are trying to tell you. Um, People get dogs for a number of reasons, and they're not always the right reasons. And this family, they had, so it was the nice car and the beautiful house, and the house was white, and they bought a giant breed dog that was over 50 kilos when adult. Now, that was, in my opinion, and this is my interpretation of this couple and their life, everything was about keeping up appearances. It was all about their outward show to the world, status symbols. Okay, so the good watch, and the the luxury, the prestige car, all these things, the best kit. Okay, the designer brands. So they then get a dog in order to try and keep up with that image, and they buy this massive dog. Okay, they don't do any training with the dog through puppyhood, and I mean none, no training, because they're able to manage the dog physically because they're stronger than her. And then she reaches adulthood, or goes into early adulthood, late adolescence, and becomes this um, huge dog that they have done no training with. All right, and the dog was because the dog slobbered. She wasn't allowed in the living room. She wasn't allowed in the dining room while they were eating because they hadn't trained her to lie in her bed. She was confined to the kitchen and the hall, so excluded from family life because their house was white and cream. Everything was, and light greys, all those colours. So the dog wasn't allowed anywhere near them because it would get the sofa and the carpet dirty. Okay, all these stuff. Now that's insanity for me. I mean, it's just insanity that these people would buy a dog like that, not train the dog, and then exclude the dog. So all of their needs in getting a status symbol dog, and none of the dog's needs. Okay, so if you buy a nice watch, you buy a Rolex, okay, or you buy a Cartier watch or something like that, it doesn't matter because the watch doesn't have any feelings. So you can have that status symbol all you like, buy a Jaguar or a high-end Mercedes or something like that. It's an inanimate object. It doesn't care. Your dog does care. Your dog feels, okay? So they excluded this dog, and then when they took the dog out, this was the only time the dog had any sort of enrichment or interaction with the world and with people, and the dog would explode with excitement because she couldn't contain herself, and they hadn't done any previous work. Okay, so that was the reality. They should rehome that dog. Okay, they should not have that dog, and if they make the decision that the dog isn't for them, that dog should be rehomed. Okay, so that's my opinion on it. And because they didn't want to do the work, because of all the stuff that I just said, they then went to a trainer who put a slip lead, cinched it round the dog's neck, and started correcting the dog and hanging the dog on her neck, okay, in order to get the dog to behave the way that they wanted them to do. So again, the dog is again paying the price for that. Circumstances change, our lives change, and sometimes it's hard to make decisions. It's really challenging to make the decisions to the right decision for the good of people, or the good of your dog. Okay, and sometimes people make a painful decision that they need to rehome their dog, or their circumstances no longer allow them to look after that dog. And we've seen that just now we've got a cost of living crisis in the UK. People might not be able to afford their dog, and they might then have to go out to work in order to put a roof over their head and feed their children. And we are shaming them by saying you should be doing everything that you can to look after your dog. Yeah, in ideal circumstances, but life's hard and we need to make difficult choices sometimes, and sometimes things have to give. And so these and again, just before we finish, yeah, shelters and rescues are overrun and inundated with dogs needing rehomed. That is true, okay? And it's also true that some people need to rehome their dogs. It's also true that some people rehome their dogs because they can't be bothered, because they don't get the right dog, because they shouldn't have a dog in the first place, okay? And all of these things are true, and it's up to us, I think, as decent, compassionate, intelligent people to sift through all that and and think about things so that when you see something online, you're not immediately drawn to just, I don't agree with that, I'm going to, shout in. And now, given that that's been 10 minutes, a 10-minute explanation for some of my thoughts on this, okay, and that's probably thousands of words. I don't have time to spend my time putting thousands of words into a paragraph or hundreds and hundreds of words. I don't type that fast, okay, in order to satisfy the people that don't agree with me, okay. So just some thoughts on it, and that's across the board with a lot of things, all right. And we can have that multitude of things and also have a line in the sand that we say we're not crossing that, I'm not doing that. And those two things can exist at the same time as well, okay. Much love and peace to you, and I'll catch you again.